It's no secret that we hairless apes have tons of interesting ways of killing each other. Some of them really kind of like, honestly, if you take the horror of it away, kind of cool. And some of them just kind of hilarious failures, I guess. Tonight, we're going to take a look at some weird weapons of war on Deep Fat Fried.
I like these. I like these weird weapons of war.
Me
dude, they're
too.
awesome.
I like these as well. I'm always interested in this weird shit.
I love, especially my favorite ones to me are not so much the cool ones. I mean, the cool ones are cool, obviously. That's why we call them the cool ones. But the failures are my favorite. Like the big, stupid, lumbering, fucking dipshit concepts that you're just like, what?
Yeah.
Like that New Zealand tank. Remember that one?
Yeah,
There's
that
a
was great.
sprinkling of a little bit of everything tonight. There's some big lumbering failures. There's some spooky shit that who knows how it worked or if it ever worked. There's some stuff that you would look at and think that there's no way that's going to work, but that actually worked really well. And then there's something that it just is awesome and continues to be awesome. So I think we got a little,
Nice
A
variety.
spattering.
what do you think? So let's talk about the cybernetic walking machine. Now, this actually inspired the AT-AT in Star Wars. This was the main design inspiration, the old videos and pictures of the machine we're going to talk about. So, so as you know, or maybe some of you don't, maybe there are some sad few of you out there that haven't seen Star Wars.
What the hell is an AT-AT? Oh, they call it an AT-AT.
Yeah, they are massive hunks of metal trudging along the tundra that shoot down ships. What you may not know is that these sci-fi mechanical creatures were inspired by real military technology, albeit a far less impressive prototype that didn't make it to the fields of war, or at least allegedly didn't.
Dun, dun, dun.
Army veteran and artist Ralph McQuarrie, known as the godfather of the Star Wars aesthetic, he painted this, created stunning concept art of hovercraft, androids, cybernetic walkers for George Lucas's films. A combat veteran of the Korean War who survived a bullet wound to the head. He probably would have known about the Army's experiments, and around that time, the Army was building some kind of like it.
Yeah, that does look pretty similar. Obviously much smaller, but
Yes, so this is obviously a concept drawing, but this was the idea. The idea had to evolve, and we'll take a look at what it became here in a minute. Some public disclosures were made at the time about the design because it was already being funded at the time. Being funded by the time their concept art emulating the design was okay. So it was already being funded by the time this concept art was made. So this wasn't like preliminary stuff. This was like after it's already funded.
Yeah, they were already receiving some funding when these when these designs came out. So like people kind of like maybe had seen some more primitive designs, or maybe just heard about the concept and had already thrown some money at it.
Yeah.
It also looks like this is more like a transportation vehicle from this angle, though.
Well, it looks, if you look up here, it seems like there's like some supplies or something up here. It's probably designed to solve the problem of moving supplies from one place to the other. I don't know if Paul's going to tell us like what the thoughts were about this thing, but it looks to me like it's meant to carry like heavy supplies over rugged terrain.
Yes, it's actually just meant to be an ambulatory tank that can deal with things that a tank can't, because it has limbs, so it can go up steep embankments and make maneuvers and carry just immense loads over rugged terrain without having to worry about their tires blowing out and all the shit that happens.
I gotta say that the time for this thing was not then, but the time for this thing might be now, because we're getting to the point where these kind of like robots with this kind of design, or a very similar design to this, have started to become commonplace. Which you saw in our robots episode, if you guys watched the episode about robotics companies.
True. So these designs were actually done by Sid Mead, who is an artist that I've heard of, but I can't place what he's done. I know he's done other shit. It's just like one of those names that I'm just like, oh yeah, artist guy, but I cannot fucking Sid Mead.
He was a futurist. Yeah, he did a lot of this. He was like a lot guy that drew a lot of like futuristic high tech shit.
So that's kind of cool. He was commissioned by the U.S. He was commissioned by the U.S. military to draw a number of these machines, to their specifications. So anyway, let's get on to the actual machine.
He did a lot of the concept art for Blade Runner and Tron. So
makes sense. Okay, so that's where I've heard of him then, for sure. So let's say. All right.
We were here, and now we're here. You know what I mean?
The bar. Look, the camera, as you know, can be very unkind, and the bar is lowered several levels.
Yeah, it seems like the design got significantly less ambitious as the project continued, and obviously, there's going to be mechanical issues that occur along the way.
I just don't know what. Yeah, at this point, it looks like most of the central part of it is like the engine. There's a bunch of wires. It looks like if any of those are cut or destroyed, this thing ain't going anywhere.
Now, keep in mind, this is a prototype. They probably would have put a shell on it or a body on it or whatever, but this is the testing prototype of it, kind of the skeleton of it, I guess. And the real downfall of this thing turned out to be that computers were not quite there yet so that they could control this thing, and it required a human to control it. And because it's not like a car, you can't just put like a steering wheel and a gear shift on this thing. And well, we can actually watch a little bit of it, or take a look at a person doing it. I think at some point, yeah, I did pull a video towards the end of this, so we'll take a look at a person manipulating this. But this was developed in the '60s by GE, and as TJ guessed, was a concept for a heavy lifting vehicle over rough terrain.
Yeah.
Since helicopters were only just coming of age and weren't able to lift much at the time. Incidentally, we'll talk about one that could lift an insane amount later on tonight. Cool. Because I love helicopters. But this walker, as it was built, could carry 500 pounds of cargo, which seems pretty fucking light.
Yeah, that's like you can haul more with a truck. Yeah,
like that. Like, is that including the dude driving it?
I'm guessing so.
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah.
So like maybe 300 pounds or something. Like that's not.
I'm going to assume that they must not be including the weight of the man, because otherwise, that's just like. I mean, it's already sad because, I mean, you go back and look at that concept art, and like it's carrying giant, pallets here. I mean, you see these big giant boxes.
This is like delivering vital supplies. This is like bringing like a couple fucking boxes of ammo.
Right.
Yeah,
and this thing was hampered. So according to people who like tested these, this one was easier to pilot. It actually was a pretty easy one to pilot, but they were never able to make it work without it being tethered to a giant hydraulic tank that if it carried that, it would be at its weight limit. So it had to have a big giant hydraulic tank to make it all work, and it had to be tethered to that. So this would have needed to have another little, it would have been like Jeff Bezos's yacht. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it would have needed another little walker to carry its fuel tank or whatever the fuck. It's just ridiculous. So it didn't work. And then there was another kind of concept for this. If you go to the next picture there, TJ.
So they've turned it at this point into like
a horse almost. It looks like.
Oh, I see. It's called the walking truck in the
the walking truck.
JPEG, so.
And you can see there's a dude sat in it, and his legs and arms are all strapped into this thing. And its biggest problem at this design phase was that it had to be operated by a human, which GE admitted was exhausting for the operator. Demonstrations tended to only last around 15 minutes. The stepping of the robot was controlled kind of like Ripley controls the loader. It's like controlled by actual movement of their legs. But really what it came down to was they were just doing aerobics all day, getting each one of these legs to move.
It's like, very quickly defeating the purpose of this piece of equipment.
So, just a very impractical piece of equipment, obviously. So it had hand-foot controlled hydraulics. They were super sensitive, and just getting this thing to move was kind of a comedy of errors. And it was roughly the size of a fucking elephant, too, which made it a big, giant, blundering mess.
A giant target, too.
And you got to imagine that this thing is not running quiet either,
Yeah.
every motion of this thing is like.
Yeah. This one had there was no application in war for
It's
this
like,
thing.
yeah, the enemy's not going to know our position now.
Maybe logistically it could have been used, but that's about the most you could have hoped for with this.
I mean, it'd have to advance so far beyond this stage to be useful. I mean,
it would have to be ridiculously redesigned. But anyway, we have some video of this.
Okay.
So we can watch this whole thing if you want. It's pretty freaking ridiculous.
One of the earliest attempts to imitate the four-legged motion of animals was this walking truck, built by General Electric in the USA as far back as 1965. A human operator was suspended in the body, and he gave the commands to each of the legs through a hydraulic system that followed the movements of his arms.
This thing is kind of interesting because it's both cool and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's like, I appreciate the innovation, but it's so absurd.
Yeah, there's just no way this is practical. You'd be exhausted piloting this thing.
This machine was capable of quite impressive feats in the laboratory, tossing a jeep out of the way, for example.
Damn.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
But the strain of thinking about which leg to move next exhausted the operator after about 15 minutes, and he had to take a rest. Nevertheless, the walking truck was considered a landmark in the design of walking machines.
Well,
yeah, look how they have to have.
It's actually crazy.
Look how they have to have it like suspended on stuff because
it can't
it's
balance.
so hard to keep the balance.
They didn't have the gyroscopic technology to keep it balanced, and so it was constantly in danger of tipping over.
They're making a human being responsible for figuring out what to do with each one of these fucking legs.
Right, a two-legged animal into a four-legged animal.
Right. I mean, we don't have the mental equipment to think of ourselves as being four-legged.
And they didn't have the computer technology to have a computer that could run it through a series of reduced complexity controls or whatever. And so it just ended up being a really impractical thing. But I think it's kind of cool. And it definitely went on to inspire a lot of futurist visions for the way that freight will be transferred, and probably it was a major inspiration to the Boston Dynamics dog. I couldn't find them talking about it, but I can't imagine that this wasn't intensely studied.
Yeah, they must have at least looked at what had been done here because
and even if it didn't directly inspire it, it was definitely a precursor along that road.
Surprisingly nimble though. They're just showing that with these blocks.
They're just showing that it's able to be very it can be very intense, or it can be very sensitive and have fine motor skills.
That light bulb test really showed it. It was like, okay, this thing can literally be on top of a light bulb and not crush it.
So it had some pretty fine motor functions. Let's move on.
There's no way this guy would have fallen over 3 times by now. Though.
Yeah, you're right.
He wasn't being held up over there.
Yeah, it's fucking terrible. It looks terrifying to pilot, and it would be terrifying to have one of these come out of the fucking woods at you. And anyway, let's talk about the real flying saucer.
Sweet.
The VZ-9AV Avro car. The U.S. Army has a flying saucer, like an honest-to-goodness, real flying saucer. It had 2 designs, actually. This first one pictures was developed all the way back in 1956. And very well maybe the culprit for UFO sightings that kind of took off during that era. So
it seems like it's not impossible.
The aircraft, which had the code name Project 1794, was developed by the Air Force and Avro Canada in the 50s. One declassified memo, which seems to be the conclusion of initial research and prototyping, said that Project 1794 is a flying saucer capable of between Mach 3 and Mach 4. That's 2,300 and 3,000 miles an hour. Had a service ceiling of over 100,000 feet and a range of around 1,000 nautical miles. It's around the same, amount of miles, 1,150 miles. While it's not clear whether the design ever made it past the blueprint stage, Avro Canada was involved in the development of another flying saucer vehicle, which you can actually see. This one.
Oh, damn.
Pretty cool. This is the Avro car. It was a result of a Canadian effort to develop a supersonic vertical takeoff and landing fighter bomber in the early 50s. However, its circular shape gave it the appearance of a flying saucer. The design was the opposite of the cybernetic walker, kind of inspired by science fiction rather than inspiring it.
They're just like, what if we built a UFO? It's like, I don't know. What if we did? Yes, there it is.
So in 1952, the Canadian government provided initial funding, but it dropped out of the project because you know how Canadians are shifty and unreliable.
True.
They claimed it was too expensive, but whatever. They should have known that. They were building a fucking flying saucer. And so the great and wonderful U.S. government stepped in. The Army and Air Force took it over in 58. Each service had different requirements. The Army wanted to use it as a subsonic all-terrain troop transport and reconnaissance craft. So they wanted to like load troops up in this motherfucker and send them in.
It does not seem like that would be a good use. Let me look at it.
I mean, maybe if you can get it behind enemy lines or some shit, who knows?
But like, how many people can you fit in it? It looks very small.
Well, if you need special forces or something, you don't need that many people,
I guess.
And the Air Force kind of wanted something completely different out of it. They wanted it to be this super fast, like fighter jet that could do like vertical moves way faster than any other jet because of its design. So instead of being like, you know, super like relying only on being super nimble and fast in the air, it could like, you know, stop and go straight up super fast. And all of a sudden it's above all the other planes and then it can drop down on them. You know what I mean? So it was supposed to be like a fighter thing.
They wanted to have like insane UFO maneuverability.
So that's not a troop transport, you know?
That'd be nuts.
That seems to make more sense to me based on what I'm seeing here. So
you could be dominant in warfare. Think about that. Like it's a jet and you like behind this UFO, it just goes whoop, whoop, whoop. It's behind it, destroys it. I mean, like obviously if you had that degree of maneuverability, you're gonna have air dominance. So obviously that's what they were thinking.
Yeah. The Avro car, or the one that they do let you see, had a kind of modest max speed of 300 miles an hour and a service ceiling of 10,000 feet. But in practice, it didn't even really get close to that. It was designed for a crew of 2 with 3 Continental J69 T9 turbojets, each with 927 pounds of thrust. Had a wingspan of 18 feet, a height of 4 feet 10 inches, and a weight of 4,620 pounds. It was very unwieldy to fly, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the problem with this whole UFO thing is like you know, I mean, like you see it in a movie and you're like, ooh, a fucking flying saucer or whatever. I gotta stop saying UFO because this thing is identified. We know what this is.
I mean, this thing was kind of like designed by the Air Force. The one we're looking at here is the one that the Air Force developed to be something that could fly real low. And it had the most horrible problem that something that you want to fly real low could have. It became extremely unstable at low altitudes.
Right, because that's where you have all the turbulence. And this thing has no way. It's just like, you know, because it's a disc.
Well, so guys, we have identified what it is. Shit. You guys want to know what it is? The fucking piece of shit in the sky, dude. This design obviously didn't fucking work for a number of reasons.
That's the thing is like you fucking see it in a science fiction movie and you're like, oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, but there's suspension of disbelief in a science fiction.
But it's like that just aliens because it looks cool in a movie doesn't mean that design actually is functional. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So,
well, also aliens have figured in the movie. The conceit is the aliens have figured out that technology. You know, obviously with this we had not figured out shit.
Yeah, and so they did this wind tunnel tests on it and shit, and it all confirmed what the test pilots had told them, that this thing was fine hovering if it was like 3 feet off the ground. But if you got any higher than 3 feet, it became like an absolute insane monster to control as, you know, the forces of gravity, it became different and the wind speed picked up and shit. And so it was fine hovering in place like at 3 feet off the ground. But if you tried to take it up, there was this whole area before it got out of like the turbulent zone where it was just like almost impossible to fly. So getting it up high enough to even test it was just impossible. But let's see. They called the pitch and roll that it would do 3 feet off the ground hubcapping. Like, you know how a hubcap goes zip, 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 zip.
Yeah, it's unstable.
Right. The Avro car could only reach a maximum speed of 35 miles an hour, and all attempts. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
People can ride a bike faster than that.
Yeah.
Dude, what a military boondoggle. You can't go higher than 3 feet, and his top speed is 35. Usain Bolt could catch this thing pretty much.
Yeah, he could outrun it. And they were never able to get the hubcapping under control. So as it did 35 miles an hour, it was doing this with a dude in it sweating bullets.
Guy is fucking scared out of his wits, just trying to fucking stay. Oh god,
fucking crazy, right?
I think they could have been good kamikazes. That's about it.
The project was shockingly canceled in December 1961.
Oh,
so
that's tragic.
But there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that believe that other one that we were talking about, that one declassified document seems to say is already in the testing phase and gave stats that were insane. Like it could do Mach 3 and shit. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists that think that this one was made and then revealed to us to show like, oh no, we don't have a flying saucer. Look how
it was a ridiculous failure, you guys. Look.
To hide the real one. And maybe that's true. I don't dude,
I wouldn't put it past them for a fucking second.
Yeah, there's some pretty,
because it just seems like a silly idea.
I know there's some pretty crazy aircraft out there that are unidentified.
Sure.
So I mean, like you've seen them, like the Navy's even declassified them. It's like, what the fuck are these things? They go super fast, super maneuverability. And this was developed like technically the 60s. So
yeah,
if the technology did progress on some experimental way, I mean, who knows?
Or maybe the aliens gave us the technology that we needed.
Yeah, like Independence Day shit. Like maybe the aliens were more friendly. They're like, "Look, humans, we give you this." And
now we just stole it from the crash at Roswell, dude. We're just like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah, we shot them down.
Man, people believe the government lies about that, TJ.
We shot them down and carjacked them, dude.
Oh, that was just a weather balloon, y'all. Anyone who says otherwise is crazy, huh?
So this next one, I'll be honest with you, the first time I looked at it, and this is not a good representation of what this next one is. The first time I looked at this one, I was like, what a boondoggle, man. This is just going to be a boondoggle episode. But this was probably the most cool and functional and useful item on the list, and maybe one of the weirdest, too, once we get into it. So any World War II buffs or people that are just familiar with American military history in general have probably at least seen or heard of a P-51 Mustang. It was a long-range fighter / bomber / bomber support. It had a really good range on it. It was it had a really reliable engine, and so it was really well known as one of the best planes in the sky at its time during its use. You see it in a lot of movies. You see it in a lot of old war films. So it was a very like integral part of World War II, the Korean War. So the P-51 Mustang was a solution to the need, like I said, for an effective bomber escort. Used common, reliable engine, internal space for a larger than average fuel load, which let it follow the bombers to the target and all the way back without having to be relieved midway so they could refuel. Which, obviously made it safer for bombers to do bombing runs.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure.
Mustang was arguably one of the best fighters of the war, not only for its technological superiority, but also by merit of the sheer number of Mustangs that flew off the production lines. There were over 15,000 airframes in use at one time.
That's crazy, man. That really is.
However, there were a lesser known variant that didn't see much of the skies during wartime, and we're going to cover that one tonight.
Whoa.
So yeah, I looked at this and I was like, man, this
looks like Photoshop, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It looks like it's not even fucking real. I looked at this and I was like, man, this looks like some rich person's fucking boutique thing that he can fly with his wife or whatever. This doesn't look like anything better than that, man. No way that the military would have ever used something like this. But actually, this thing was just kind of a victim of the eventual obsolescence of the propeller and the onset of jet technology. Like, had we not developed jet engines, we probably would have seen a lot more of these. So this is the twin Mustang. It's essentially two modified Mustangs kind of like joined together to make this weird Siamese twin of an airplane. But it's just, sometimes I guess the very simplistic theory of like, well, we got one Mustang. What if we taped a Mustang to the Mustang? You know what I mean? And we got two Mustangs. Sometimes that line of thinking leads to something that's actually useful.
This looks like a nightmare because think about this: one half of this sustains damage, like you're both going down. So it's like having two different. Like if you have two planes, like you have more of you have a greater chance of those surviving a conflict than something like this. This gets hit, it's like you're both fucked.
So if World War II had not wrapped up the way that it had, these were meant to be long-range bomber escorts for the ongoing war against Japan. But they never saw any service because apparently, 2 bombs is all it took. I can't remember why, but we didn't really have to do much bombing of Japan, at least not like numbers of bombings.
Yeah, Hiroshima and Nagasaki made that this a moot point.
We figured out some crazy weapon that allowed us to do like 10 billion bombings at once, which, I can't remember what the name of that was either. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So yeah, like I said, they just basically taped two. They didn't tape it, but they melded two of these things together.
Yeah. Here's a new plane.
And what it gave it access to was extra fuel stored in the drop tanks beneath each one that you can see here. The twin in 1947, one of these set the world record by flying nonstop from New York to Hawaii, which is like an insane fucking distance.
That is.
It's nearly 5,000 miles, and they did it in under 15 hours in one of these.
Oh, wow.
Well, that is quick.
So it's fast, long range, like it's basically badass as fuck. Like had the age of the propeller not come to an end right at it's definitely top of the line for its time. It may have been the most deadly thing in the skies for a long time had jet technology not surpassed it and overtaken it. So yeah, this thing is badass, man. And by the way, that record still stands to this day. Set in 1947, and we still don't have an aircraft that can do it in that amount of time, nonstop.
Let's bring it back then.
The fuck, that's crazy. Dude.
Yeah, let's bring back the fucking the twin Mustang.
Yeah, the new F-35 will be two of them merged together.
When it comes to Mustangs, like when it comes to fighter planes, obviously a big jumbo jet can do it, but this is a fucking fighter plane that can.
Yeah. These are not huge. I that's why I assumed, because I guess you have two engines. or two fuel tanks, or potentially more. Obviously, so it's supposed to be for bomber runs.
Way more power. So if you don't use it for bombing runs and you use it as like a fighter escort and just use it for its machine guns, it can be super light, carry tons of fuel.
We have to think about the possibility for war. So like with that, it's like they could be on the coast of California and do a bombing run because they could refuel, and if they could refuel those bombers in the air, they could hit Japan directly and come back, or launch from Hawaii. And so like Japan would not have been out of reach because that was a big thing during the war was they couldn't get, it was too long range. Like it's like famous like the Doolittle thing where they attacked Japan and shit. But they had to crash land in China, which actually cost China 250,000 people were killed because of that. So
true,
it would have totally changed World War II if this. But obviously, the thing we're not going to mention that did the job for them.
Yeah. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit. I just thought this was a pretty cool little forgotten piece of existent technology. You can still see a few of these on display, as you can see at air museums and such. But I really want to kind of get time to at least talk a little bit about the last one on the list. And you may, if you live near an American air base, have seen one of these, although it's pretty rare to see them flying around, at least domestically. But I think they're super fucking cool. And there's something about them that seems very like old and futuristic at the same time. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is. They just seem like a timeless.
Yeah, they hollowed out the helicopter. They got rid of the whole little passenger and cargo section there. And they're just like, yeah, this is going to now be a towing vehicle. And you see it lifting up a fucking whole ass jet down there.
So it's called a flying crane for a reason. It's a Sikorsky CH-54 flying crane. It's equipped with a crane in the center of the fuselage that's operated by a second pilot or a co-pilot or an engineer from the back seat of the pilot's cabin. The crane operator has a good view of what's happening, behind it and from underneath so that he can operate the crane, which makes total fucking sense.
Right.
It's demonstrated the very best capabilities in combat. It climbs with a maximum speed of 100 kilometers per hour, even being overloaded. So even when it's like loaded down, it can climb at 100 miles an hour straight up. So, I mean, this thing is like a beast. When it comes to moving massive amounts of troops or materiel in a weird situation where you can't get a plane and it's hard to get, like, this thing, it's unbeatable. And it was used in Vietnam. It's still used today. In comparison to the AH-1 Cobra and UH-1 Iroquois, the losses of CH-54 helicopters was minimal. Also, it was unique because of its tremendous lifting power. In the Vietnam War, the Sky Crane had to cope with loads such as damaged air and ground vehicles. Also played a significant role in military engineering projects. It would be the thing that you'd load up all the bridge building materials in. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like in a situation like Vietnam where the roads are just dangerous, you can't, when you clear one, another one becomes dangerous. Being able to just like bring that shit in from the air and having one of these is invaluable. I guess it was retired from military service in 91, so I guess I was wrong about it still being used. But you still see it used, I guess, commercially because of its versatility and because of how good it is at its job. You see it construction. You'll see the Air Force flying these like during parades or when they're moving equipment. They still will use them. They're not used in like the war theater anymore, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. That's
it looks like also they use it for like the firefighters and shit. Use it to carry the water tanks and shit because it just has such a huge carrying capacity.
Yeah, it's used by firefighters. So a lot of the firefighters that fight those big California fires fly these in and dump the chemical solution that puts out the fire and shit and retards the fire. And they still make these too. It's not like you're just using up the old stock of them. They still actually produce new ones of these. So I guess if you're rich, you can buy you one of these.
Whoa.
Which is like
Okay.
now, that's not like now a goal of mine. If I ever become like a multi-billionaire, I want a Sikorsky, dude.
Hell yeah.
Give me a CH-51.
And if anybody asks me why, I'm going to slap him in the face and say, to lift things, stupid.
Bring me the entire contents of the Golden Corral now.
Well, Paul, that's how you build your compound in the middle of nowhere, dude. This lifts everything there.
Duh.
There's no
I
roads.
could have them load up a giant fucking container filled with all my favorite snacks. People are always like, LOL, Paul wants an island, but then he would eat with coconuts and spider monkeys and he'd be fucking hate it. I'm just like, you dummy. Dude, if I'm a multi-billionaire, have one of these every week if need be.
Mm-hmm.
So
dropping
anyway,
the ho-hos.
that's
Dropping
some,
the junk food. Yeah, right here. Come here.
give it to me. Fill it with I want one of these filled with hot Cheetos every Tuesday. Loaded to capacity.
Paul just sits outside just waiting.
I just sit outside in my pool with my mouth open, and they're like, "All right,
Just
dropping
sitting on the
load."
beach, smoking a fucking cigar, being like, today's Cheeto day.
There's a dude with a machine gun loaded up with hot Cheetos, shooting them into my mouth. Yeah. So, anyways, that's some weird weapons of war. If you like this, let us know in the comments. I'll do another one. Thanks, bye.
yeah.
And of course, like it.
Deep fat fried. Deep fat fried.